Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday, June 6, 2018, and this is the Promotional Malpractice Live Chat. I am here with your trusty sidekick, Barbas. Say hi, buddy. Manos arriba. There he is. Today on the podcast, we will talk about UFC 225. We'll get to, what else we're going to get to? Let's see, UFC Utica. We'll get to the weigh-in changes. I'm guessing some tattoo controversies and a whole lot more. Best place to get your questions in, of course, is going to be on MMAfighting.com, where this window, stop struggling, buddy, where this window is embedded. And then, of course, on Twitter as well. You can use the hashtag chat rappers. You can just tweet me at LThomasNews. Yes, you guys haven't seen Mr. Barbas in a while, right? He's doing well. Yeah. It's because my studio kind of changed the way I don't let the cat in the studio because they'll tear up everything, and the dogs can come in. But anyway, I just wanted to show y'all he's live and kicking, and he's my trusty sidekick. He's the official mascot of this. Yes, and you have a gross belly, buddy. Yes, you do. Okay. There you go. All right. Barbas is alive and well, y'all. There he is. Still handsome. He is. All right. Is there any housekeeping issue? I don't believe that there is. Not one I can think of off the top of my head. Anyway, that's it. So let's just get right to this chat. Oh, and by the way, Coke Zero, the breakfast of champions. All right. Changing weigh-ins, a potential solution. Hey, Luke, this might seem crazy. All right. Let's hear it. This person writes, I know this is bold, and it would mean changing a load of things, media events, venues, blah, blah, blah. But I think there could be a simple solution. People point to athletes cutting more weight now, but we really can't confirm that. There seem to be two problems. Number one, self-discipline notwithstanding. But there's not enough time to hydrate later weigh-ins, not enough time for some to cut their weight early weigh-ins. In other words, what if we moved the weigh-ins back to 4 p.m., but we moved them to Thursday instead of Friday? Like I said, I know this presents a whole set of new challenges logistically, but wouldn't this solve both problems? Perhaps it would make fighters think they can cut even more weight than before, but at least it would make that a very obvious problem, which could be addressed on its own, right? You could do that if you're willing to do hydration testing the rest of the time, right? Because the obvious problem there would be if you have 48 hours to rehydrate, well, hey, that's a lot of time to rehydrate. On the other hand, if you're thinking, man, if I have 48 hours to rehydrate, I could probably cut a metric ton of it. So you'd have to find some kind of way. And there are ways, if they wanted to go through with this, there are ways to do that along the course of the week. The question is, are they willing to do that? And then, by the way, if you can do those things during the course of the week, then there's no actual reason to put it back on Thursday, unless what you were trying to do was maybe give yourself a little bit of lag time in the event that there was a fight cancellation. Right, so you have 48 hours as opposed to 24 to make some kind of miracle happen. In either case, it would be a miracle, but at least you would have some kind of ability to adjust. Look, it's a fine solution. I don't think that it's likely because it would be so out of the ordinary, right? But it's not a bad problem, or rather a bad solution to the problem. I just don't find it. They're going to go with what they know or what they can reasonably achieve. Pushing it back to Thursday, while novel, I don't think is particularly likely. Let's see. Someone says, 2 thoughts on weight cutting. Cheating, any solution should be addressed? Should be. Should also be addressing the fact that at least some fighters might be missing weight intentionally. There is a cheat to win incentive structure. That would be the case no matter what system you took up. So it says, look at Till, however controversial, he got the W and is now ranked second in the division. Do we think he cares at all that he had to give up part of his purse? Yeah, but that to me is not like the Mackenzie Dern thing. I mean, Darren Till went blind trying to cut weight, and that's not okay that he didn't in the end, but I don't get the sense that he was trying to game the system. With Mackenzie Dern, I don't know what happened there, but certainly I think if you want to cast a little bit more skepticism about missing the weight in the way that she did, as Dominic Cruz had suggested, she's a more natural candidate for that kind of a thing. Someone also says you could set up the scale early and let people weigh in then if they want to, but they won't need to. A lot of regional BJJ tournaments I've done offer day before and morning of weigh-ins where I can choose to weigh in early and not have to do it at the last second. I don't see why the UFC can't do something similar and have an early option and a final option. This is the way I would do it if I had a say, which of course I do not. But if I had a say, the obvious answer here is you don't get rid of either of them. You make both available. Some fighters are going to have a problem making those morning weigh-ins. We've discussed all the reasons before, whether it is self-discipline, whether it is some kind of disruption of circadian rhythm, whether it's just not good for them, or for whatever the answer is. It's just not optimal. But they can probably make that 4 o'clock weigh-in. Okay. And if you weighed in the morning and your opponent weighed in afterwards, you got some kind of a rehydration head start. It's that person gave up that right. I don't know how in the end that might influence our discussions about winning and losing, right? Because right now we have it as a case where if I make weight and then you as my opponent do not, and I still say, let's say you miss by 3, and I still elect to take the fight, if I lose, people will still talk about advantages. I wonder if that might change the conversation about advantages. If I choose to weigh in at 4 and you, my opponent, choose to weigh in in the morning and I lose, how would that affect? Now, not making weight is not the same thing as making weight later, right? Because one is literally not committing to what you're doing. The other one is, but rather in a sport where you can win by the narrowest of margins, what kind of effect would it produce if we saw fighters who were weighing in earlier winning more often? Or conversely, how would it change things if we realized over time that weighing in earlier in terms of winning and losing confers no benefit? It's an interesting discussion. We won't really know what the answer is there until some of these policies are instituted and you can play them out a little bit. But I am kind of curious about that. Someone notes that I explained some of this in my radio show. I won't stick to this topic too long. I'll mention this one thing and move on. Look, man, I think a lot of us are this way. I saw everyone coming out with these like crazy strong opinions. Look, if you're a fighter and that early weigh-in was really good for you and it really benefited you, hey man, I don't want to get in the way of that. I'm not nearly enough of an expert. I am so far from being an authority on this issue that I hesitate to make any kind of strong opinion about it. And I can understand why fighters who felt that system was really good for them, the kinds that did all the things that they were supposed to, who were professionals, who were, really making the sacrifices in camp and then doing the right things on fight week, why taking this away might feel like a bit of a slap in the face to them. I totally get it. Number one, guys, you've had a long time to collectively get together and you haven't done it. So part of me, as I said last week, I do feel sympathy, but it is going to be limited because we have gotten to a point where this wouldn't even be an issue but for the fact that there's no group on your behalf who will speak. The UFC will continue to make decisions like this because they can. It's as simple as that, man. So that's the first part. The other part I think I would say here is that I saw strong opinions about this would be a danger. This is a step in the wrong direction. And look, it is quite intuitive that if someone says, if you get more time to rehydrate, is that good for you? Of course that's good for you. But this is the thing that happens all the time in MMA. It happens all the time to the point where we just accept things. I mean, MMA is one of these sports where the argument from authority just goes unchallenged. And the argument from authority is not that the person is right, is that because I hold this position, whatever I say must be true, which I just never accept that, ever. It's almost never the case that you can simply rely on that. Sometimes it's true, and certainly you want to listen to expertise, and I am, but this is my point. Yes, it is so incontestably true that in general, more time to rehydrate is good for you. But my question is, if you weigh in at 11 and you end up fighting at, I don't know, what is it, 6 o'clock that night or whatever, even earlier than that, depending if it's a UFC on Fox card, right? You could end up fighting somewhere along the lines of 4 or 5 p.m. or something like that. So let's say 6 hours. How beneficial is that really? How beneficial is that to winning and losing? I'd like to know. And how beneficial is that from some kind of medical evaluation, from some kind of data collection? What do we really know specifically about that window of time from the early weigh-ins to the fight time that gives you versus what you would get weighing in at 4 p.m.? How much is that difference, right? So if it's 11 to 4, it's like a 5-hour difference. And if you're waiting at 9, it's at most 7, right? So how much is in that 5 to 7 hour difference? What does that really give you in terms of medical benefit? And look, I am perfectly willing to believe that it could be profound, that it could be so critical that, in fact, doing away with the early weigh-ins would be egregious. Guys, I am perfectly willing to believe that. But my only point about all of this is that we don't really know what the answer to that is. And yes, I think erring on the side of caution is probably the right way to go, which means leaving in place the early weigh-ins, but making available weighing in later at the ceremonial weigh-ins, right? I think that's probably the right idea in terms of caution. But these arguments about how this is some kind of travesty, how do you know that? To my mind, there's been no work done evaluating these windows, specifically these windows, as it relates to ultimate performance. And so my only point is, if the hunch is that more time is better, I'm not going to disagree with you. But it could also be that that window, in terms of really being beneficial to your medical health and or your chances of victory, is negligible. Well, then some of the outrage about this is not defensible. And without really having more information, I see all these people pounding their fist on the Formica asking to see the manager because they just can't believe the treatment. And I'm like, y'all never get together to do anything for yourselves other than the occasional tweet or interview or something. There's been no collective action. This is the situation you have gotten yourselves into, number one. And number two, it seems to me at best there is not dubious science, because it's not dubious. We do know that longer windows create better hydration, but related to this specific incident and these specific moments, there's no work done. So I'm a little bit hesitant to just say this is an outrage for a lot of different reasons. Probably not a good idea. I think I probably would say that. But outrage? I don't know. That seems a little strong to me. Is Covington the worst welterweight title challenger in a decade? Hi, Luke. It's a little over a decade since GSP reclaimed the title from Matt Serra. These many years. Previous fighters who have fought for welterweight gold have had a been there, done that feel to them before they challenged for the belt. It's not surprising, given that welterweight has historically been one of the marquee divisions in the UFC. All right. This person writes, here's the list. I think Covington is either the worst or one of the worst challengers in a decade. And those challengers are GSP, Fitch, Penn, Alves, Hardy, Koscheck, Shields, Condit, Diaz, Hendricks, Lawler, Rory, Woodley, Wonderboy, and Maya. It's someone went through the list here. You know what? I'll make that green. Okay, this is what this person writes, which I feel like is pretty accurate. Let's see. So which of these fighters this person writes could Covington beat? GSP? No. Fitch? Yeah, I do think he could beat Fitch. Although prime Fitch, hard to say. Penn? Probably. Alves? Not the one at UFC 100. I don't know about that. Hardy? Probably. Koscheck? Probably. Although that one's debatable. Shields? Probably not. Condit, yes. Diaz, yes. And of course, a lot of these are just via the strength of his wrestling. Hendricks, no. Lawler, no. Rory, no. Woodley, no. Wonderboy, probably not. And Maya, of course, he already did, which someone that writes 7 out of 15 ain't bad. Puts him right in the middle of the pack. Now, you can disagree with those picks. Maybe you think he can't beat Penn, or he can't beat Fitch, or Diaz or Condit would have their way with him, or sub him, or something like that. That's fine. We don't really know enough about him against the super elite to really have a clear sense of things, although he did beat Maya. Maya was a title challenger. Number one, this is the interim title. It's not really the title. So it's just something created by fiat, in which case it makes this designation certainly not irrelevant, but I think you have to temper any kind of just placing them alongside. alongside somebody that went all the way to the top. And yes, everyone got their title shots a little differently, but for me, it's so not the same thing that it's not. You can't ignore it, but it's some kind of middle space. In any case, no. I think. Look, here's what's happening a lot with Covington. He may lose to RDA or he may win. I think my hunch is that he should be able to. Whether he does get past RDA is a different story, but he should be able to get past him. But that's a very big if. But then at that point, I don't really see how you can beat Woodley. Stranger things have happened, I suppose. But the point is this: look, there are a lot of people who really dislike Colby Covington, despite the fact that they claim that they don't, which is just the funniest thing on earth to me. I mean, Colby Covington's shtick doesn't make me laugh. Not much anyway. But the way in which Colby Covington's shtick annoys people absolutely makes me LOL. Neither here nor there. He bothers a lot of people. And I think when you bother a lot of people, you don't get a lot of fair assessment of his ability. He did beat Maya. I mean, if that had gone another round, he probably would have stopped him. I mean, he had Maya bleeding everywhere. Now, yes, his style is not the prettiest, and his style is a little bit limited in terms of its well-roundedness, but it is pretty effective as well, that Varley Alves fight notwithstanding. So, it's right. You're right to put limits on him. There's a lot of these guys I don't think he could beat. And I don't think he's going to end up beating Woodley if it comes down to it. But this weekend, I don't know. Nurmagomedov was able to fairly easily out-wrestle RDA. You're going to say, well, two things. Luke, Colby's not RDA. Excuse me, Colby's not Nurmagomedov. That's true. And also, this is upper weight class. Also true. And a lot of time has expired since then. Even truer. So to me, it's very competitive. RDA could easily win this fight. I mean, to me, it's like, it's pretty competitive, almost coin flippish, to be quite honest with you. But it is doable. It is doable for Colby Covington. I don't know how doable it is for him to, if he gets past, to beat Woodley. That might be a bridge too far. But if he goes in there, in this person's words, smokes RDA, well, then what? Someone says his trash talk is awful. Listening to him on Embedded was the first time I've heard him. I don't believe you. And it's Ferguson cringeworthy and sounds like something, this is what they wrote, out of a bad sitcom in a high school locker room. Hey, nerds, how about you stop eating Cheetos in your grandmother's basement because you're a virgin and don't have sex with women because you're nerds and stuff. Yeah, it's a little corny, but the corniness is its joy. Every time everyone is out there being like, oh, I don't like Colby Covington, I can't stand him. It's like, right. I don't think he cares. He's not looking to make, at least this juncture, legions of fans. Now, we've talked about it before. How far can that take him? There are limits to that. I think, in fact, if he loses to RDA, a lot of this will just blow up in his face. But if he gets to a title fight with it, might be able to do something with it. And people are now imitating him. People it could be, sorry. I see a lot of mockery, but I don't understand. Like, a provocateur is only denied by the removal of oxygen, not by the consumption of it in a different way, right? If you don't like him, silence. That's the only way, because any kind of negative attention is a nihilistic win. And there are some people who dislike him to the point of being annoyed, but they don't treat him as some kind of existential crisis, or they don't have some kind of deep-seated hatred for him, and they keep their mouth shut about him. That's how you beat him. You want to beat him? Pretend he doesn't exist. All right, Whittaker Romero 2, adjustments and improvements. Yeah, UFC middleweight title fight coming up this weekend. By the way, does anyone feel a lot of buzz for this? Now, I don't want to play this game every week, where every week there's a title fight or a major UFC event. I'm like, I don't feel any buzz. And then Friday comes around, you're like, I feel some buzz. So I'm not going to play that game this week, merely to say CM Punk being on the card has been very, very quiet this time, which I think is good. Good for him, actually, and good for MMA. Still not good that he's on the card, but all things being equal, I will take this way over the last way 10 times out of 10, even if it means lower pay-per-view buy rates. And Whittaker and Romero still are not going to be draws, I think, anytime soon, at least on the pay-per-view side of things. But that could change by Friday. I guess we'll see. I just want to point out, I know we do this all the time. Oh, we don't feel buzz. And then by the time the fight comes around, it's, the buzz is roaring. I'm just saying, let's just see. In any event, in the first fight, Whittaker won a close but unanimous decision. Romero took the first 2 rounds, Whittaker the last 3 on all the scorecards. How do you see the title fight this time around? What adjustments must Romero make? Who do you think have improved the most? It's going to be interesting to see to what extent Romero strikes with Whittaker. I think that's going to be the big one, because in the first one, what he was able to do was out-wrestle him without even really firmly establishing control. So, for example, it wasn't that he couldn't get him down, he got him down, or that he couldn't control him on the ground to an extent he could. But if you notice, the big knock on the grappling of Romero, not the wrestling, is that he doesn't have finishing control. So he'll get the back from Turtle. And if you have the gi on from Turtle, there's actually a lot you can do to control them. You can grab the belt behind the collar without having to put your hooks in. Or you can spiral ride. There's all different kinds of things you can do, get him to a hip. And he's able to do some of that. But my point being is he never puts the hooks in, because that level of polish, that level of finish, he just doesn't have in the grappling department. And that was really draining on him. You go back to the Rockhold fight and you go back to the Monday Morning Analyst about that, and what did you see? He would spend minute on minute, even rounds sometimes, just blocking and then parrying shots and then exploding in a moment. Will he do that here? Because he doesn't need to necessarily outstrike him, but if he can hurt him a couple of times, if he can hurt him enough to establish a takedown without a lot of extra work, that to me could be something really, really interesting. On the other side, with Whittaker, I'm looking to see him stick and move, man. Stick and move, stick and move, stick and move, and force Romero into some kind of desperation. Because if Romero decides, remember, Romero's not a two-way striker. He either is on the defensive or he's on the offensive, and nary the twain shall meet. He doesn't really go back and forth. He doesn't slip and throw, cut an angle, throw, block, block, throw. It's block, 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 block until it's time to go, and then he goes, and then he circles out, and then it starts over again. He's not a two-way striker. So if I'm Whittaker, I'm going to try and force him to be without giving up position wrestling, without putting myself and my footwork in a position where I can just be lifted off my feet and thrown. And look, some of that might be inevitable, right? You just know that, it's hard to imagine over 25 minutes Romero not getting a single takedown. That seems hard to process. But if you can minimize that, minimize the damage, work on hand control. Robert Whittaker's takedown defense is good in the following sense. It's not that it's necessarily lights out, but number one, it gets better over the fight, which is the best way to have it in my judgment. Yeah, to be lights out would be the best, but I don't know how realistic that is. It is realistic, but very difficult to have the kind where you can make the adjustments over time positionally, with your feet, with your hands, right? Because you think about the first line of defense, those are the first line. Once they get past it, your elbows are the next line. And once they're on the inside space. So establishing those forms of control are pretty critical. You can do it with your feet. You can do it with your hands. You can do it with your movement. You can do it with your footwork. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if I'm him, don't allow Romero to sit back and conserve energy. You got to make him work. You got to make him work. And that's not that easy to do. Sometimes he does it for you. That was the thing. He did it for Whittaker in the first fight by making him wrestle. Now, he took the first 2 rounds doing it, making it a close and competitive affair, heading into that 5th round. But if there's a way to make him work without having to surrender as many points, or, proverbial points anyway, or rounds or minutes or moments, that's the way to do it. So you can make Romero work. He's a much different fighter. And the key for Romero is going to be to not do that, to preserve, to wait, find his opportunity, to be on the defensive and explode when he needs to. Because when he does, when he can time that correctly and he's got energy, there ain't a person in the world that can stop it, man. UFC and Yair Rodriguez back together. Yeah, that's a weird one, if I do say so myself. Yair versus Zabit. A couple of weeks ago, Yair was fired, and now the UFC and Yair suddenly have sorted out their differences. Apparently, Yair is fighting Zabit in September. Do you know any details of this 180 between Yair and the UFC? Did Yair just apologize and then he was back on the roster? Or did the UFC realize that they have lost a potential Mexican star and didn't want to lose him? My understanding is the UFC did not did not do that. And how do you see the fight between Yair and Zabit? I still think it's a bad fight for Yair, although it's a great fight for us. I don't know all the details, so I won't say anything I don't know. But my understanding is that was not a UFC-generated mea culpa. That came from Yair's side. How it came to be and why it came to be and how it all worked out in the end, that part I'm not sure. I don't know if he's making the same money or the less money or he goes back to the old contract. I don't know. I don't know if there was any apology. I don't know about that. But I do know that this effort at reconciliation came from him. All right. Someone writes, either Yair bet the knee or WME did crisis management. That's probably what happened with Holloway, Stipe, Rockhold, and Woodley, new contracts. Yair, Alvarez, Poirier, Joe Duffy, Ally, Quinta, less or similar pay. In the last year or so, UFC let go of Ryan Bader, Benson Henderson, Rory McDonald, Phil Davis, and Gegard Mousasi due to contract disputes. Fast forward, and they've been reluctant to cut anyone. Interesting. That's a good point. Although some of those were not in bad faith. Yair Zabit prediction. Somebody writes, Zabit will be on top of Yair on the ground while Yair looks up at Dana and Sean Shelby yelling, boo. I don't know if it'll go quite like that. But yes, I do think that Zabit has more ways to win. And for a wild striker who can overcommit, and for a guy who's hard to hit like Zabit, he's going to find that body lock sooner or later. And then from there, it's going to be a problem. He's going to be a problem for Yair. Zabit's a problem for everybody. So, take that for what it's worth. Predictions. Hi, Luke. What are your predictions for UFC 225? All right, I'll give you my non-committal predictions. How about that? Which is not doing predictions anymore is like the greatest thing in my life. Because, as I mentioned before, if you do well, nobody says anything. And then if you do poorly, people just tear you to pieces. And if you do well, you always get the people who are like, oh, I bet on this one fight this one time. Great. Like, you got to be able to show over time you can do this. And even when you do, there's no joy in it. In any event, so these are my non-committal predictions, right? I reserve the right to be a hypocrite and change my mind. With that in mind, Whittaker versus Romero, I'm going to pick Whittaker. Dos Anjos versus Covington, I'm going to go Covington. Holm versus Anderson is interesting. I'll go Holm. Arlovsky versus Tuivasa is also interesting. I'll go Tuivasa, but with reservations. And then CM Punk versus Mike Jackson. I will flip a coin. Here, let's do a coin flip. Let's do a digital coin flip. Here we go. Call it heads or tails. I'm going to call heads. Flip it. Heads. There it is. And heads, of course, with CM Punk. So CM Punk wins. Preliminary card. Alistair Overeem versus Curtis Blades. I like Overeem. Gedalia versus Esparza. I like Gedalia. Lamas versus Bektic. That's a tough one for Lamas, but I'm going to say yes for him. And then Rashad Coulter versus Chris De La Rocha. I'll go Coulter. Evans versus Smith. I'll go Smith. Benavidez versus Pettis. I'll go Benavidez. Clay Guida versus Charles Oliveira. I will go Oliveira. And then Santiago versus, I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. Dan Ige. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I'll go Dan. So there you go. These are my non-committal picks. Don't put any money on any of them. All right. Andrea Lee fallout and takeaways going forward. Someone says, I'll start the question by saying, on the one hand, I think we have a lot of bad ideas about criminal rehabilitation. I think Andrea Lee's husband's criminal history is relevant, but he served his time and it shouldn't be the focus of the discussion. I can agree to that. That said, there's absolutely no justifiable reason to still have non-covered Nazi tattoos outside of some rare medical condition. While both of them have apologized, I don't think an apology to this particular issue is enough, especially given Lee's initial response. I'll break this question down into 3 sub-questions. By the way, this apology thing, like, I don't want your apology. And maybe they mean it here, but I'm saying we have these like, you should get up and apologize. Why? Why should somebody apologize for things they're not sorry about? Wouldn't you rather just know? Like this whole thing with Samantha Bee. I'm sorry for calling Ivanka Trump, excuse me, a feckless C, right? It's like, you know, you're not sorry for that. You're sorry about the backlash. You're sorry about potentially losing your show and sponsors. But like, I know you're not sorry, and you know you're not sorry. Why are you saying you're sorry? You're not sorry. So stop saying it. Yeah, it's just a pet peeve of mine. But okay, just stop doing stuff that you don't think is good. All right, so the 3 parts of the questions. Number 1, how do you think the UFC should handle this situation, particularly in this case when it's Lee's husband and not her? Well, they had a code of conduct. You guys remember the UFC code of conduct? What happened to that document? Do you guys even realize that used to be a thing? Here, UFC code of conduct PDF. Let's see if we can find this. Joker. Where is it? Where is it? Here we go. UFC Code of Conduct. Standards of conduct. Ready? Criminal offenses, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Discipline may be imposed for misconduct, which includes, without limitation, the following examples. And there's a series of criminal offenses, violent, threatening, or harassing behavior, like throwing a hand truck at a bus, perhaps. Let's see. Criminal offenses including but not limited to those involving the use or threat of violence, domestic violence, or other forms of partner abuse, theft and or other property crimes. Okay. Derogatory or offensive conduct, including without limitation insulting language, symbols, or actions about a person's ethnic background, heritage, color, race, national origin, age, religion, disability, gender, or sexual orientation. Now, this, of course, is for UFC fighters, but if you're going to defend that kind of thing, at least not defending the tattoos so much as the defending of the reason to keep them, and then calling everyone sensitive mofos. Conduct that undermines or puts at risk the organization or promotion of a UFC event, including without limitation, failure to deliver, engage, and otherwise execute, blah, 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 blah. Conduct that undermines or puts at risk the integrity and reputation of the UFC. The discipline may take the form of fine, suspension, cessation of service, and may include conditions be satisfied prior to the resolution of the incident. It goes on from there. Yeah, I mean, that would have been a nice little rubric, but of course, they didn't get the fighters' permission to do that, and I think they backed away from it as a consequence of any worries about potential employee versus independent contractor disputes, but whatever. In this particular case, I would probably I think at this point, I would have a discussion with Lee and be like, you know that this is crazy, right? Like, the fact that he doesn't cover them up is crazy, but you can't make somebody do something that they don't want to do. But to the extent, please try to limit exposure to this kind of thing on social media. And then more to the point, please do not tell people who think that your decision and your husband's decision, rather, or partner's decision to keep Nazi tattoos quite visible are sensitive ass mofos. Probably not a great decision, pragmatically speaking. Please don't do that ever. That's the one thing I would say. If they do it again, well, then you got some problems. But how do you think fans should react to this situation? Obviously, nobody should defend them, but I feel like too much public outcry is at best unproductive. Yeah, I think it's quite productive, actually. Well, limited, but productive. And then someone says, what level of responsibility do you feel as a member of the MMA media in covering this? Also, now's a better time than any to say something nice about Angela Lee, who was awesome. I confuse the two names all the time and only assume she's taken some collateral damage. I guess. I mean, Angela's not the same as Andrea, but okay. You never know. All right. So, I mean, look, what the UFC should do, I think counseling is probably at best. I don't think you necessarily have to do a whole lot more than that. But certainly some of that might be in order. How do you think fans should react to this? I think if they feel outraged, they have every right to. Not so much that, again, you can't control what somebody does, but when their response is that, basically get over yourself, is a little bit insane. And then what level of responsibility do you feel as an MMA media member? That's the interesting one here. And, no one ever wants to defend MMA media, but I love doing it because I know it puts people on mega tilt. And I think in this particular case, we are totally well within our right to say something. Here's the interesting part about this. It's like, and I made this point earlier on my radio show too, which is Like, okay, so what are the two playoffs that are happening now? Baseball season's in full swing, but you could talk about that too. But there's basketball and then there's hockey. Why is there no talk about someone's partner having Nazi tattoos, or a guy who did a 23andMe test dropping the N-bomb? Certainly getting a pass from one of his closest African-American friends, but not many others. Or that we commonly hear anti-gay slurs still, or, you know, people will take money from murderous dictators. I mean, pick your wheel of misfortune here. Why don't you think you ever hear anything like that in other sports? Right? I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons, but the major one is they either don't do those things or they are smart enough to keep them well hidden. And you can say, well, that's dishonest. I'd rather somebody just be who they are. Well, to an extent, I suppose, especially when it comes to like apology, like you got to just be who you are. But if you want to be sensible and participate in this world, some level of concealment probably is beneficial for everybody in that particular regard, right? I mean, if you feel like your principles matter, well, then stick to them. And if you want to compete in the UFC, I would say don't do that. Here's my point. Those reporters aren't talking about those other issues because their athletes that they cover aren't doing that shit. This is real simple, man. This is super simple. I am more than happy to just talk about X's and O's, or this, which frankly, this story I think about CM Punk and this trial this week is like incredible, right? He's going to go and fight and do all. I mean, it's an amazing story, and like the story of the lawsuit itself is kind of interesting. I would much rather talk about things like that than the fact that somebody has a swastika and then SS bolts on his arm and felt that covering it up would be too redneck. I mean, this is the most ludicrous thing I think I've ever heard in my life. And then people are like, well, you're being too sensitive. If you think that being concerned about somebody being involved, even tangentially, in mainstream sports, either having or defending the other practice of the person having, whatever that reason may be, short of, again, a medical skin condition, having Nazi tattoos, you have lost the fucking plot, man. Wow, you are out to lunch. Trust me when I tell you, you are not a normal person. If you think that, you got real problems that you need to address fast. It is not normal. It is not normal at all to think that. And in MMA, we definitely have this problem over and over and over and over and over again. It is one of these industries where if you just look at enough rocks and turn them over, metaphorical rocks, you will find metaphorical worms, so to speak. It's going to keep happening. This is going to keep happening. This is a common, not the Nazi part, but the acceptance of not merely eccentric characters, but difficult and problematic ones, and attitudes of blithe unconcern about other people around them and what it means to live in a community and a community of others, frankly, because the two are actually quite different. And you can say this is all this, BS, is SJW talk. You can do all that if you want. You can rationalize it away if you want, but you have to ask yourself a very simple question. Why is it that those other reporters, some of whom would love a scandal like this to talk about, because it'd be so good for them, I suppose, right? Juicy ones. Why don't they talk about it, right? And in fact, the problem, a bunch of them are probably glad they don't have to. It's probably mixed like it is in MMA too. I'm sure we have our own clickbaity ones, and I'm sure we have guys who don't want to do it. So let me go back and say, let's be fair. There are probably people who don't want to talk about it. Well, why don't they talk about it? Is because those things happen in those sports and they just ignore it? No, nobody does that. Their athletes don't do shit like that. That's why you never hear things like that over there, or very rarely. You get your occasional Richie Incognito, whatever he's doing, kind of nonsense. But it's pretty atypical because they don't do stuff like that. People in MMA constantly do things that to the rest of the wider world are crazy. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. And so MMA media ends up having to pick up the stuff. I know people say you can ignore it. Trust me when I tell you there's a lot we ignore. You just get exhausted by it. You get exhausted by it. You just can't believe it just keeps happening over, and you get numb to it, man. And it begins to warp your perspective about what is appropriate and what's not, and what kind of things can be justified and what things can't. I have no problem with her husband or her partner, whatever the particular nature of the relationship is, in prison, doing what that gentleman had to do to serve out his sentence and then survive in that place. I have zero issue with that, man. None. Not one problem with that. It's a very difficult situation for anybody, and it's a difficult circumstance to have to endure. You got to do what you have to do to ensure your safety and survival. So fine. But after that, you have to make some real critical calls about what message you're sending, who you are, what you believe, what's appropriate, how you fit into civil society. And then for everyone else to, or for others being like, oh, it's no big deal. Fuck, yes, it is. Yes, it is. And stop pretending like it's not. It's insane to think it's not a big deal. It's not an end of the world deal, but it's a big deal. And it doesn't happen on any other sport like it does happen here, where people just say, get over yourselves. No. Fix it. And then we get over it. But I'm telling you, this is not going away. You can sit here and you can wish for the MMA media to stop covering this stuff. It's not going to happen. It is a natural human response to go, hey, this guy has tattoos on his arm outside of a prison context that have probably been there for some time. He's done nothing about them. Okay, there might be some kind of explanation for that. But then when a concern is raised about them, the people raising those concerns are being told to stop being sensitive-ass mofos. That is a totally unreasonable response to a situation like this. Totally unreasonable. And it's whether it's tattoos or it's something else, this will continue to happen until everyone's conduct basically just gets to the point where we can move on. But if you think that in any other sport, they would just look the other way and say, well, I don't want to get involved in all this SJW talk. You're kidding yourselves. So then ask yourself why it doesn't happen in other sports. And then it should be a bit of a light bulb moment about what's happening here. We are flooded, inundated, drowning in it relative to our other peers, our sporting peers. And it just gets exhausting. It just gets exhausting, man. So what's the appropriate response? I don't even know anymore. I know it's crazy to defend that stuff, but like, I mean, are we supposed to report on every, you could literally, if you wanted to, you could literally have a beat in MMA focusing on just its, these sorts of issues of, the adoption or the excusing of racist ideology, of tenuous connections to shady characters, right? You could do all of those kinds of things. You could do, if you want to cover MMA strictly as that, you could do it. That's how pervasive it is. And so, what's the appropriate response? I don't know anymore, man. I really don't. I don't know anymore. I know that I'm tired of it. I'm tired of talking about it. I'm tired of having to witness it. And I can't believe in 2018 the concerns about what kind of class you might show by getting an ugly tattoo relative to keeping a Nazi tattoo is just, it's beyond reprehensible. It's incomprehensible. Ugh, God, I'm done. ESPN TV deal. I'd rather talk about that. God almighty. Let's see. What kind of viewership numbers will ESPN be looking for per show to justify the price per year? Is it a simple X number of viewers equals Y in dollars? It's a great question. The answer is I don't know. You have to look at let's see, Lomachenko versus Linares ratings do. Let's see what that did. Okay. So that did, let's see. Lomachenko versus Linares was the most important and meaningful combat sports event of the weekend. And unsurprisingly, although it went head-to-head with the UFC event, it had the most viewers and the best rating. The 2-hour broadcast averaged 1 million or so viewers and drew a .35 rating in the 18-4 demo and an impressive .51 among males aged 18 to 49. The main event itself, which saw Lomachenko rally from a knockdown, blah, 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 10th round averaged 1.4 million. So I would say that or better. That or better is what you're looking at. It's what you're looking for. It would probably need to beat that. Whatever it had normally done in the time slot or whatever. In terms of the streaming numbers, I don't really know what the answer is, because is the answer with the streaming how many subscribers they brought in rather? Is it number of subscribers you brought in plus the live streaming numbers? Is it just the streaming numbers if you don't bring a lot of subscribers? Can you have a lot of streaming numbers if you don't bring a lot of subscribers? I don't really know what the answer is there. I guess we're going to have to see what the metrics are, and we're going to have to figure out what everything is doing on that platform, but that's going to be a lot harder to measure because that's going to be, I think, proprietary numbers. I don't know that Nielsen will have any access to that. By the way, did you guys see Nielsen is going to be counting YouTube TV numbers, if not imminently soon, in parts of the ratings? Because I watch my Capitals on YouTube TV, and they're going to start counting that. That's going to be interesting. I'd be curious to see what that is. I don't expect that to be a huge bump or anything, but I think it's a step in the right direction of getting a sense of what are the actual number of people watching something, some kind of legal streaming or legal television device versus, is television simply what we can measure from the linear side? But it's a good question. It'll be something we have to follow going forward. The answer is I don't think anybody knows right now. Certainly I don't. Is RDA an all-time great if he wins Friday? Although his resume is nothing but impressive, I'm wondering whether RDA earns this distinction. True, winning 2 UFC championships in 2 divisions is an incredible feat, but 1, it's an interim title, and 2, it's a diminishing feat the more it happens. Let's look at his resume. Is he an all-time great? Okay, here's his UFC resume. He came into the UFC 11-2. Right, he lost his first 2 at featherweight, I believe, right? Or was it lightweight? I don't remember. To Jeremy Stevens and Tyson Griffin. Okay. Then he beats Rob Emerson, Kyle Bradley, Terry Edom, loses to Clay Guida, beats George Sotiropoulos, loses split decision to Gleason Tebow. From there, however, he began to get a lot better. He defeated Kamal Shalarus, Anthony Njokuani, Mark Bocek, Evan Dunham, and then Donald Cerrone. Folded Cerrone there, right? Then, that was lightweight fight. What am I saying? The early ones. Then he loses to Nurmagomedov. This was back in 2014. He then beats Jason Hyde, Benson Henderson, Nate Diaz, Anthony Pettis, and then Cerrone again. Of course, during that time, wins and then defends the title, loses to Eddie Alvarez, loses a tough fight to Tony Ferguson, then goes up and beats Tarek Safadine, Neil Magny, and then Robbie Lawler. So what can we say about that? His losses come to 3 previous champions, although he did beat a previous champion in Anthony Pettis and Robbie Lawler. So to me, and when was his UFC debut? In 2018. Man, he's been in November of this year. He'll been doing this 10 years in the UFC. That's pretty good. All-time great, huh? I'd have to think about that. Certainly he has the longevity that I'm looking for, right? Not merely how much nice wins you have, but how much time you spent at the top in an active competitive schedule. And by the way, look at how much he was competitive. 2 fights in 2009. 1, 2, 3, 4 fights. Excuse me. 1, 2, 3 fights. Excuse me. In 2010, he had 2 fights in 2011, 3 fights in 2012, 2 fights in 2013, 4 fights in 2014. Good Lord. He had 2 fights in 2015, 2 fights in 2016, and then 3 fights in 2017. He has stayed active that entire time. So that is very impressive as well. So I'll say this. He certainly is a force to be reckoned with. And he has one of the key ingredients I'm looking for, which is longevity. But and the wins over Lawler and Pettis are nice, but it's an off-prime Lawler, and he beat Pettis at his peak. So I'll give him the Pettis one. It's just not enough for me right now. Not saying he can't get there. I think if he were to beat Covington, get that title, and then beat Woodley, that would be for sure a very different discussion. But I'll say right now, it's a little bit low for me. Now, someone is saying RDA is a top 10 all-time great lightweight. That is true. RDA has beaten former champions. We've established that. RDA's most signature wins. Oh, I guess the Benson fight. Yeah, you can count that too. That's another previous champion. RDA's most signature wins. Pettis, Diaz. The Diaz fight was not much of a signature win because that Diaz fight was weird. He came in, I believe, overweight, as I recall. He had been injured. He didn't fight like a Diaz fights. Not to say he would have beaten Dos Anjos. I don't think that he would, but it wasn't a weird. It's a weird performance. And then Benson and Cerrone are all underrated. Someone says, in my opinion, Dos Anjos losing to Eddie Alvarez hurts his all-time great case. It does, since Alvarez was already a consensus GOAT lightweight before even entering the UFC. Are you saying doesn't? Right. Well, here's the problem with that. He got stopped inside the first round. It hurts his case a little bit for me. Another person writes, the 2 championships would be more meaningful if because he's on a 3-fight win streak at welterweight. Unlike McGregor, he actually took and won a few fights in a new division before getting a title shot. That has to mean something. Yes, including one of our former champions. It's an impressive resume. It's a very impressive resume. All-time great? I don't know. It feels like something's missing there. Because like, what's the signature win? Is it the Alvarez? Is it the Pettis win? Because the Lawler win carries not much, but some degree of controversy with it. Plus, it was a post-prime Lawler. I don't know. It's a hard one. I think if you have to have this much consternation about it, the answer is probably no. But he still has time left to do some impressive things. So I think if he's not now, if he continues his winning ways, he has potential to be one. And that's more than you can say for a lot of people. Dana's comments on cutting more fighters. Yeah, those were interesting. Do you think fighters will, A, see Dana's comments as the UFC feeling pressure to maintain events ahead of the ESPN schedule? Probably something to do with it, but I doubt, even if that wasn't a part of it, I don't think that, like, I'm sure that's adding some emphasis, but I don't think that's the genesis of this. I mean, people have been turning down fights left and right. Like, we all know this. We went moments in time where the 2 best divisions, lightweight and welterweight, they had no fights booked. You're looking around for the top 10 guys. You're looking around, you're saying, how is it possible that there's no one in the top 10 booked in either of these divisions? This did not happen simultaneously. This happened in staggered stages. But it's true. It did happen. That's insane. That's insane. So I'm sure that, getting their ducks in a row prior to the ESPN launch, which will be for some months, is a priority. But I don't think that's the genesis of this. Take this as a warning to toe the company line, always. Take matchups without any pushback, always. You're saying which will the fighters do? Do they see it as a thing to get everything ahead of the ESPN schedule? Probably. Take this as a warning, definitely. Take matchups without any pushback. Some will. Or D, do nothing. Others. It depends on their leverage. Everyone is going to do what they can according to their leverage. The problem is the overwhelming majority of UFC fighters don't have any leverage, so most of them will do C and not D. But yeah, those comments were interesting, weren't they? It's like, how do you parse that one? First of all, I said that was going to happen to more fighters. I've actually been texting a few fighters I know have been turning down fights to see what their status was, and I didn't get a response from, I don't think, any of them. Although I've got some texts I need to check now, but you get the idea. Like, this is more pervasive a practice than we might commonly realize. I'm wondering what are the heads that are going to roll. There's a couple of names that I think we'll see. I don't want to say, we'll see. We'll see. I'll just leave it at that. Which, of course, you already hinted at. I'm not saying anything new on the UFC Unfiltered podcast. I don't want to do the thing where I promise things. I'm not going to say that. So let's just see what happens with that. But here's what's interesting to me about this. If you're Dana, what do you do? Right? What do you do? Because there is, I would argue, some merit to what he's doing. Some merit. Now, look, all of this gets complicated by so many factors. There's no union. There's no association. when they make these practices like this, there's nobody protecting them, the fighters, in the end, other than what their own leverage gives them, which is, as we know, not much, right? So there's that. That's one problem. Another problem is you could say things that might make this easier on them would be if they got, their purse guaranteed, or if they got a pay raise. I'd be more likely to fight if I got a pay raise. And I'm sure that holds some truth to some people. But if you talk to the UFC internally, one of the comments you hear back is that the more we pay guys, the more they sit out. Now, that's a controversial statement, but I'm just telling you where I think they're coming from. I'm not saying I agree with it. I think I agree with some of it because, you get your Diaz's, but I also think those guys are pretty rare. But that's the kind of feeling that they have. Nevertheless, you want guys to take all the risk. Oh, accept this fight, even though it may not be good for you. And by the way, you only get your full purse if you win. That doesn't seem like a very good deal for a lot of guys. I can understand why they would be reluctant. So maybe you can make that, at least if not raise their pay, guarantee it. Something to be said for that. But here's the other problem with all of this. It's like, and I'll just be honest about this, Dana is right to recognize there's a problem here. Now, whether the toothpaste is out of the tube on this one and he's just trying to push it back in, I don't know. I recognize that we have this situation where if you're an independent contractor and not an employee, you have every right to turn down any of those that you want. I gathered that all the way. I 100% agree that the UFC is trying to have their cake and eat it too. We want having the cake of you being an independent contractor, but the employee-ness of you not really saying no to any kind of offer. Because if you're an employee and your boss says, hey, we need you to do these reports, you have to do them, right? You don't get to say, I'm going to choose to turn down that job today. No. You're an employee. You have to. So they get in it both ways here. I'm not making any claim to the contrary. All I'm saying is, if you're the UFC, you are right to recognize that there's a problem with how the culture has shifted, how guys are taking any kind of leverage and momentum that they can, and that people sitting out fights is a real problem that could only get worse if you don't do something about. I'm not defending the actions per se here of him doing that, cutting your ears because, he's tweeting fake news or something. But he's right to recognize it as a threat. I can say that, right? And then the question is, what do you do about it? And then one of the things you can say is, I think you could guarantee pay and see what that does. But the other one is, beyond that, what do you do besides coercion? Because there's no association or union. And threats work. You know what I mean? Like, hey, if you're not trying to be a championship fight and I call and give you a fight, you should take it kind of thing. That stuff is effective. So, and they've never done anything about it before, the fighters. So, I kind of understand their position. All right, let's see. I don't know what this person's saying. All right. Anderson, let me go to one down here. Let's see. Luke, in the last Monday Morning Analyst, in my opinion, you were completely wrong in your conclusions about close, high-low volume striking judging. You rightly said that it's very hard to score a fight when the number of strikes is very close, i.e. the striking criteria itself, of course. The part that I totally disagree is when you say that it's even harder when the strikes are very low, e.g. a round with very low input, you mean output, as 4 to 5 as opposed to high volume 25-25 would be harder to judge. What? Hold on. The part I totally disagree with you on is when you say it's even harder when the total strikes are very low, okay? E.g. when a round with very low input, that's what you write, as 4 to 5 as opposed to a high volume input of 25-25 would be harder to judge according to you. Yes, I do agree with that. Okay. Someone says, I disagree, writing with an E. 5 to 4 means outstriking by 20%. 25-24 means outstriking by 4%. Are you high? To better understand, let's change strikes landed to knockdowns. What? One round with a 1-0 knockdown, the least possible low input apart from nothing, as opposed to 5-4 knockdowns, would it be any doubt that 1-0 scenario is easier to score? Of course, I'm assuming in all the cases that all the remaining striking judging criteria are level damage type of knockdown. And the striking differential is a key factor. Oh, my Jesus. Is this trolling? Are you trolling? It's not that it's easy to judge when fights are close, whether it's 5-4, which is what you saw in the first round of Wonderboy versus Till, or 25-24, or you can space it out a little bit more. Let's say 25-20, right? Which is what the actual better spread there would be if you're multiplying them both by the same factor, right? That's why it gets a little bit easier in circumstances like that. If a 5-4 more naturally translates to a 25-20, so you can get a bit of a different vibe there. So partly it's that. But the issue is that when it's 5-4, you have very little to go on. So you have to paste on top of what you saw potential extra meaning that may or may not be there. That could be also easier to detect or harder to detect based on your proximity to said action. And then it becomes a real challenge. Whereas when you have 25-20, let's say, again, you're multiplying them both by the same factor there, what you end up getting is one, a slightly bit of a different, greater differential, but be that as it may, put that aside. What you get is you'll probably get much more of a complete picture of what the person was able to do. What did the striking look like? What were they trying to do? Were they really sticking behind the jab? Were they really pounding those low kicks, but were they getting hit in the face as a consequence? And how do you weigh those two? You have a lot more information to make a choice about. More information, not always, but typically is better for making decisions. And just turning strikes landed into knockdowns. Knockdowns are seminal events that clearly indicate something particularly special has happened. You cannot just change strikes landed to knockdowns. If that were the case, I could just change takedowns to submissions, and Yoel Romero would be your Mundial's winner from last weekend or something. I mean, what do you talk? I mean, it's just no. Anderson Holm anticipation, most delightful of days. I was simply curious that you do you feel any excitement about this fight finally happening? I do, yes. This isn't so much a question about who do you think will win, as I recall you stating that you were edging towards Holm in that case, but rather that we were finally get to see Anderson get that chance to prove herself as a fighter in the big leagues, right? Also, as a member of the media, how do you think she has handled her first big media exposure? Pretty good actually, I would say. Yeah, you saw our own Casey had a nice video portrait. That was the name of the video portrait of her on the channel, so I would recommend giving that a good look. Remember, she's been doing some extra media for a long time. She was associated with the Cyborg fight. She had to answer for her first complication when she fell out, and we never really knew why she fell out of the fight and had this sort of extended hiatus for a time. She was at was it 214 she was at? And she came to the back. And she did a scrum back there. She did a lot of things, I think, recently where she's been getting a lot of extra media attention. So they kind of gave her a slow push towards something greater. And so far, it's gone really well for her. Yeah, I am curious, man. For all the reasons we've talked about before, Holm taking another fight like this is kind of interesting and weird. And what's it going to mean for the bantamweight division? What's it going to mean for featherweight if she wins? Can Megan Anderson become a potential star? The UFC could use one or not. Is she going to flame out? Like, what's going to happen here? There's a lot of different ways this could go. Big stakes involved for a couple of different divisions and some interesting potential fights. So, yeah, I am very, very interested in this one. Very much so. And the other part is, Megan, how old is Megan Anderson? Let's see. Megan Anderson is what? 28. So she hasn't competed since January of 2017. She should have grown pretty substantially in terms of her skill set during that time. And I'm curious to see what she's got. Very winnable fight for her. Very winnable fight. How excited are you for the real main event on Saturday? CM Punk versus Mike Jackson. I have nothing against him. And again, I have a lot less feelings about it this time, in part because it's not novel anymore. He already had the one fight. And also because, again, the real way to learn is to go and build up properly, to train with white belts and blue belts, and then the occasional higher belt, but whatever I think he got promoted to blue, so now blue and purple, right? And occasional white belts too, right? Somewhere in that nexus is where he needs to be to really work on his game, to work on his wrestling and with people with commensurate skills, a little bit lower, a little bit higher, and to take fights with people with a commensurate ability and experience, a little bit lower, a little bit higher, same around the way. The best way to do that in incremental stages to really go on a martial arts journey would have to happen against a guy like Mike Jackson on a regional level show. So my real only objection here is not so much the fight itself. It's the appropriate one for his martial arts journey. It's just that they're catering it to him on a platform where it doesn't need to be. It should be on LFA, or not even that high. It should be on a very, very small show. That's how you build up your martial arts journey. Like the best way to learn, if that's what you really care about, and not just a paycheck, the best way to do that is this incrementalism that has to happen that he has heretofore rejected. I think this is a much better approach for him. I don't know how good he is because we never got people like, oh, he can definitely beat Mike Jackson. How do you know? We haven't seen fuck all from him one way or the other. And I don't know much about Mike Jackson either. This, to me, is very unclear who could win. Maybe he goes in there and gets whooped again. Maybe he goes in there and puts it on Mike Jackson. I don't really know. If he won, I would not be surprised because I can't sit here and say we know a whole lot about either of these guys, to be quite honest with you. So Joker's wild, really. I think my only point is this is a much better way, but still far from where it actually needs to be. But what's my level of excitement? It's close to zero. This is not the. If UFC Utica was one of these, as I tweeted about this, is one of these giant decimations of these arguments where there's no such thing as too much MMA or it's always the sleeper cards that get you. No, there is MMA at the elite level. Jimmy Rivera versus Marlon Moraes, right? That tiny nexus, and yes, Marlon Moraes got the better of him pretty quickly, but that's the sweet spot right in there. That very, very top of it is just so unlike the rest of MMA. Most of MMA looks the same. It's the very, very special kind that separates itself out, and the very special fighters typically do that. And there's always craziness to MMA, but in terms of like entertainment through skill, there's very little of that. And that's not to demean the people who out there go in and try very hard and again go on their own martial arts journeys and their own fighter journeys, and they make some money for themselves. Good for them, man. It's not, there's nothing you can hate on about it. But I'm just saying, as a spectator, the sweet spot is not that. The sweet spot is not someone going on a martial arts journey. Some people have strong opinions about Punk. Look, man. After that lawsuit he had this weekend, that's crazy that he's still fighting. Has to be a bit of a morale boost. But you have to ask also what kind of stress that was on his family, on him, on everything, Fighters rejecting fights. If the UFC openly shared the bouts they offered fighters more often, would this put more obligation on fighters to accept the fight? For example, the Eddie Dustin fight offer was very public, and it felt both fighters were obligated to accept the bout, either accept the fight or lose fans. I feel this tactic by the UFC would work to get the UFC's stars back fighting. For example, if an offer is made public between Nate and Lee and promoted because of the fans' excitement, both fighters would feel obligated to take the fight. What are your thoughts? I think this could backfire. In certain cases, it is probably true that the UFC making public certain revelations can benefit them. In fact, they've done it before. And by the way, they'll announce fights that have been made that have not been made. This is a way to pressure people. Like, for example, Yair versus Zabit was not signed. Oh, here we go. It's on for August 4th or whatever it was. No, that's not the case. So it's already a thing that they do. I think if you did it constantly, you would sow some serious seeds of discontent. A lot of these fighters would say you're operating in bad faith. And the public, I think, would eventually turn on them when they would say, when the fighters begin to find some kind of voice to push back against. I think you can go to that well once in a while to, push somebody along those lines. But just continuously outing everyone like that, that feels like you are... you're being incredibly, you're, and also as a fan, do you want to be manipulated that way? The fans and the UFC, the reason why the relationship has worked for so long is because their interests align with the UFC's most closely. and the fighters not necessarily. And when everyone was working together, that's when the heyday was. So, if you can never get to that place again, great. But I understand the fans being to an extent being understanding of the UFC trying to make the fights that people want to see. But then, do I want to be used to make somebody take a fight for something? I mean, again, on occasion, I don't know that I would mind the manipulation, but if it was just a routine matter, I don't know. That seems like you're asking for trouble in that point. The fighters have been able to convince the fans that sometimes what's in their interest should at least be respected. If even if it's not necessarily in the fans' interest, that has actually happened a fair degree. And I think you might be courting disaster if you just did it constantly. So I don't know. Chael said to pick fights. I find it ironic that one of the UFC's bigger stars in 10 years would publicly state over and over again for fighters to be pickier about their opponents. I think it was on Sherdog where he mocked people who would say, I'll fight whoever the UFC puts in front of me. He mocked it in a number of different places. Yeah, I don't like the UFC letting the fighters play matchmaker, but if it's not my preference, but if they're going to do that, take it and run with it, right? He's right. He's totally right. If they are going to give you that kind of leverage, why would you not use it? Man, I've been wondering about this too. One Championship, a sleeping giant. I've been impressed with One Championship's production values. Rich Franklin's One Warrior series and the owners, they seem every bit as business savvy as the Fertittas. I think there's a lot of hyperbole written about them, but yes, I do grant that Chatri Sityodtong is an impressive guy. But I only recognize a handful of their fighters. Can you give a perspective on how big this organization is in Asia? You'd be better asking someone like Anton Tabuena over at Bloody Elbow about this. He has gone to many of their shows. He lives in the Philippines. Are they just a regional promotion, or are they a sleeping giant poised to become as big as the UFC? Someone says they have the best rule set in MMA. Stomps, soccer kicks, and knees to the head of a downed opponent. Love it. And they judge fights as a whole, not by round, which is another big deal. But you're right. They don't really have marquee talent. So what they've been banking on is this regionalism. It's like regionalism writ large. If you're a Malaysian fight fan, we have some Malaysian fighters for you and some interesting ones here occasionally. And same for Singapore or China now and Japan to an extent and that kind of thing. I don't know to what extent they have any presence or how much of a significant presence in the Korean market, although certainly they're big in Southeast Asia, right? Laos and places like that. But yeah, they're impressive, and their app is amazing. I love their app; it's so handy. But I do think that they're up against it if they can never get past the talent development burden, right? Simply, and it's not that they don't have good fighters; they do have good fighters, but they don't have like super great ones. That's what they're really lacking. And I think without that, over time, I don't know how much this, I mean, ethno-nationalism is powerful, but can it sustain a promotion forever? I don't know. At some point, you need to have the best of people doing things to really make headway. You can be a minor league for a long time. You can do that. You can sustain, but can you ever really be, as big as the UFC? That would be very difficult to imagine. All right, it's 2:15. Let's go to the Twitter machine, see what you got for me. Let's see. True or false? Andrea Lee gets cut by the UFC. False. Nor do I think she should. Again, I don't like her answer at all, but I'm not calling for her job. I'm not. Now, if this thing just continues to happen this way, well, whatever. But if not, if she can change, at least put a lid on the pot, then whatever, just move on. But Rose Namajunas fights Jessica Andrade by the end of the year. I think so. Golden State Warriors sweep the Cavaliers. I'll say true. Certainly looks that way. Brazil will win the World Cup by defeating Germany. Ooh. I don't know, man. Spain's got a good crew this year. I'll say true. Brazil looked good. Neymar looked awesome over the weekend. So, someone says, I get Bryce Harper and his wife are rooting for their home teams, and we should all be understanding of that. But comparing these two pictures is absolute gold. On the one, you have Max Scherzer and Ryan Zimmerman, and on the other, you have a forlorn Bryce Harper and his wife in folded up arms, bitter at the Golden Knights losing. The Dave and Buster's Golden Knights. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be mad at him for it. I find it a little annoying, but you got to cheer for your hometown team, I guess. So, how many buys does 225 do? 250. Nice haircut. Thank you. I found a new lady that comes to the house. The other lady who cut my hair moved away, and I had to go to this place in DC that was insanely expensive, and it was awful, and I hated everything about it. So I didn't want to do it. And I was like, man, what am I going to do? And then out of the blue, my other lady who moved away reaches out to me. She's like, hey, I have a friend who also cuts hairs at homes, and she'll do it for the same price I did. I was like, bet. It was awesome. Luke, did you watch Andrea KGB Lee's UFC debut against Macedo? Yeah. What do you think of her grappling and fight skills in general? She's a super talented fighter, and she has a bright future if she can, avoid any of these larger spectacles. Someone says, I'll be rooting for RDA this weekend, but if Covington manages to win, a part of me will be chortling. Hashtag, he is the idiot we need. Hey, man, whatever gets you through the day, I guess. I do think that if he wins, there is going to be some wailing and gnashing of teeth about him. It's going to be fun to watch. What's next for CR Bahadurazada and Lyoto Machida? Ooh, let me table that one. I'll come back to it. What would you feel would make the best chance the UFC can... What would you feel would be the best changes the UFC can make concerning the ESPN deal? Earlier start times, 8 pay-per-views a year, putting their biggest stars on TV. I don't mind the TV deal as such. It's just a pay-per-view. If they could cut that down to 9 or 8, I'd really be... And then, yeah, okay, hold on. I'm lying. What am I saying? Start time. By the way, I have it on really good authority that... so they are going to start, it looks like, those pay-per-view cards. Excuse me. What am I saying? They are going to start those ESPN cards on TV. I don't know about the ESPN Plus one, but on TV, it looks like they might be doing it at 10 p.m. But I'm told the pacing on ESPN linear will be better than Fox Sports ones. And I'm told the pacing on ESPN Plus will be even better than that of ESPN. And that's on extremely good authority. So exactly how much better it will be, I guess we'll have to see. But if we are worried that it will be just like, how FS1 did, 6 fight main cards, 30 minutes each, going to 1:30 at night or something. No, I don't think it's going to be like that, as I understand it. In any case, let's see. Colby's trash talk is cringeworthy and just isn't clever. All right. Opinion noted. Hey, Luke, a couple of chats ago, you said you don't eat pork because of factory farming. Do you miss bacon? Not really. Also, it's pricey, but wild boar bacon is pretty great. I wouldn't be opposed to eating something from the wild. Sure. Wild boar bacon. Is it me, or is Dana White sounding more and more like his buddy Donald? I'm assuming you mean Trump. And is Matt Serra the new Matt Hughes, defending everything Dana does? I don't know what Matt Serra's saying enough to say that. I mean, he's doing the UFC Unfiltered podcast and the show with Dana. So his opinion, I love Matt Serra, and it doesn't bother me at all. You got to live your life in retirement however you can. But if you're taking a check from these guys, you have to imagine that his opinion is going to be in pretty close approximation to what they want it to be related to those issues about them. So, right? If you work for your employer, you're going to go out there and smash them around? Probably not. So I would expect the same. Do I think Dana's sounding more like Trump? No. I mean, well, here's the thing. He kind of got away from it. Dana's getting his old mojo back, right? Getting out there, cutting fighters, and letting people know what time it is, kind of thing. Yeah. Have you seen Solo yet? If so, any thoughts? The new movie. Yes, I saw it recently. It's fine. It's fine. It's not a great movie. Here's the interesting part about that. I don't think it was intending to be a great movie. there is very little character development, and what character development there is minimal but sufficient. I will say I was disappointed in Donald Glover, because I forget the guy who played Han Solo. I thought he actually did a pretty good job. I didn't think Donald Glover by any stretch did a bad job, but it felt like he was trying to be Billy D. Williams doing Lando Calrissian versus Lando Calrissian himself, or some, younger version of it. And by the way, your younger version is not going to be like your older version. So that didn't work out so well for me. But, I mean, in this household, we are Team Chewbacca. You understand that? I have a Chewbacca onesie for Halloween. Yes, I do. I love Chewbacca, and we support the Wookiee army in this house. And so he had a lot of screen time, which I was very happy about. Woody Harrelson's always pretty good, although his character this time was, it was a very sort of it was mostly just a movie made for action and fun. And I think if you took it on that, it was fine. It was not supposed to be some kind of deep exercise. And I appreciate the limited scale of it in that sense. What are your thoughts on the NFL anthem saga? Does any professional team in any sport visit the White House during Trump's presidency after this? I'm sure some will. I mean, there was a contingent of athletes from the Eagles ready to go. I mean, look, it's red meat politically, right? This is one of these situations where being like stick to sports doesn't make any sense because the two are totally intertwined. I think Trump does it for political effect quite successfully. We can be honest about that. To me, I've said this before, I don't speak for veterans in any capacity whatsoever, but as a veteran, I am telling you, I don't give a flying fuck if you sit or kneel or stand for the anthem. It doesn't mean anything to me that you do that. Patriotism is not defined by such. Only under the most cosmetic and cheap facsimiles of patriotism can one say that such an act honors some kind of national commitment. No, it doesn't. If you want to honor a national commitment, then sign up for either military service, run for office, large and small. Make sure you are a contributing member of your community. This can include things like mentorship to disadvantaged children. It can be donating to charity. It can be being on your school board. It can be on your city council. It can be something as small as neighborhood watch. It can be any kind of these things where you actually take an act to contribute to the civic good and you participate. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It is a contributor's. The engine only works if people actually do something about it, right? So figure out what that is for you. It doesn't have to be military service for everybody. And by the way, even if you serve in the military service, that doesn't give you the right to then lecture everyone, which I know I'm doing right now, about it afterwards. Everybody, including vets, they have to keep contributing over time. Everyone has to keep doing it. But standing for a pledge, do you think I care? Do you think anyone I know I mean, some people are going to claim that they care, but they really don't. It's total nonsense. It is nonsense. You're not doing anything for me or anybody else who served by being 7 Miller Lights deep from tailgating in the parking lot before your next Cardinals game and then standing while you hold your bladder thinking about something else other than the fallen. I don't even know why we need these stupid ass rituals at games anyway, where we have Pee-wee in the halftime. I guess that's for entertainment, so that makes sense. Look, I love the national anthem. It's fine during the Olympics. You have to stand at attention when you go to the movies in the Marine Corps at the local theater on base. That makes sense too. But, asking players to do it, I don't care. I do not care. And these phony shows of patriotism that mean nothing, that mean absolutely nothing. They don't do anything for me, and they definitely don't do anything for you. Chances of you doing a UFC 225 post-fight show. Hi. What's a pass mark for Phil Brooks in his upcoming fight? Show progress. I'm not looking for him to be some great fighter. I just need him to be better than the last version that he was. So show progress. That's the martial arts journey. How will being in court for last week and a half affect CM Punk? $1 million question. And nobody knows, but it's a huge one. It's a huge one. Would you like to see Conor McGregor fight next? Who? A grappler like Charles Oliveira or Gilbert Burns? Or maybe a wrestle boxer like Bobby Green? How about none of them? Let's see. Fantasy fights. McGregor versus RDA at 170. Ooh. RDA, I guess. But McGregor can easily win that, so it's a hard one to call. Whittaker versus Woodley. I'll say Whittaker. O'Malley versus Lineker. I'll still say, oof, that's a tough. Boy, that's a tough one. That's a great question. O'Malley versus Lineker. Because O'Malley can stick and move. I'll still say Lineker. Hand speed's too fast. Till versus Lawler. Pre-Condit. Oh, Lawler. Pride Vanderlei versus Rockhold. Rockhold. And Adesanya versus 2018 Anderson Silva. Adesanya. For sure. All right, we'll do one more of these. Who stands to gain the most from UFC 226? Stipe retaining his title against current light heavyweight champ, or Cormier joins a short list of 2 division champs in UFC, or John Jones. Jones fights the winner pending he isn't suspended for too long. Going to be Cormier. For Cormier to, yes, the Jones loss is hurt, but to have been the champion that he was, ultimately for the Grand Prix, Strikeforce, and then to come over and do the way he did in the UFC, and then to beat the heavyweight champ, who is widely considered to be the best heavyweight champ, not widely, but predominantly considered to be the best heavyweight champ we've ever had. That's the guy who's got the most to gain. All right, ladies and gents, I appreciate you guys watching this. It's going to be UFC 225 this weekend. Should be a good time. Appreciate everyone watching. I think the crew, Ariel and the rest, are in Chicago, so be on the lookout for those videos right here on MMAfighting.com. I appreciate all of you guys watching, and until next time, stay frosty. Oh, and for Barbas as well, stay frosty.